Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Alera Moju, and I am a sustainability specialist with the County of San Mateo Office of Sustainability, and I work on our energy programs. I am the county lead for the Bay Area Regional Energy Network residential programs, codes and standards programs, and green labeling, which focuses on increasing resident participation in receiving home energy scores and trainings for realtors and assessors. I will be co-leading this session with a technical expert, Myra Vega from TRC Companies. Myra, if you would like to take a moment to introduce yourself, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. As Lara mentioned, my name is Myra Vega. I'm a senior project manager with TRC. And the reason I'm here today is because I'm part of the Reach Codes Initiative team that has been brought to you by Peninsula Clean Energy, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and East Bay Community Energy. I've been on this effort for the past 2 years. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Myra. Okay. So before we get into the meat of things, I just wanted to remind you all to use the Q&A function if you have any questions or concerns. We will go through each section, and I'll cover that in a moment, and allow some time to answer any immediate questions that might have come up relevant to the section we just covered. If you're having any tech issues, please be sure to reach out to Camille Lang. She is our tech guru for tonight, and her email is in the blue box on the slide. I wanted to give a quick overview of the Office of Sustainability. Our office was formed in 2014, and our mission is to build sustainable communities that fulfill the needs of the present and the future. We have programs that both fight and prepare for climate change, programs that help ensure clean energy, water, and air, and that conserve resources for future generations through waste reduction. And we work to create livable communities that have affordable housing near transit that are both bikeable and walkable. Today, we're focusing on initiatives that live in our energy programs, which is where today's conversation about REACH codes comes to play. Here's a quick overview as to what today's remaining time will look like. Firstly, we will provide some context as to what REACH codes are, why adopt a REACH code. We will look at the 2022 building code. We will talk a little bit about costs, and we'll highlight what's taking place regionally around the Bay Area as well as within San Mateo County. And lastly, we will cover some EV technical language, just because there are EV language in the 2019 REACH code that was adopted by San Mateo County, as well as in the model REACH code. So following providing that context, I will provide an overview of the 2019 model REACH code, which both has a building and EV component to it. And then Myra will give us an overview of the 2022 model code, which was drafted by Peninsula Clean Energy and a few other CCA partners. I want to highlight that we will not be presenting any ordinance today or any ordinance language or proposing one. We will leave room for questions, as mentioned before, at the end of each section and as well as the end. So I'm going to hand things off to Myra to provide the context as to what REACH codes are.
Thanks, Alero. So REACH codes are local enhancements to a code, and the two categories that we really focus here on REACH codes is building electrification and transportation electrification through EV charging ordinances. And the REACH codes can take a variety of forms, from local municipal amendments to actually amending the building code. So the reason we're here today is because the next code cycle is going to start in January. And so we're here to give all this information for the county to get feedback on their proposal for the 2022 REACH code. Next slide, please. And the reason we're targeting those two areas, buildings and road transportation, is because we could really make an impact on reducing our GHG emissions to kind of align with where the state is headed in terms of reducing our carbon emissions overall. Next slide. So just to put things in context, the purpose of this slide is really to demonstrate where the statewide code is going come January 1st, 2023. So on the left-hand side where you see the new construction column, really the main point there is that heat pumps are going to become the prescriptive baseline for the entire state of California, and depending on which climate zone someone is building in, it's either going to be a space heater or a water heater that's going to become the baseline. And just for anyone that doesn't know, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a requirement, but it does mean that if someone were to build and not put in these prescriptive measures, they would have to make up those energy credits, and it's a harder build, so to speak, if you don't put in these prescriptive measures. So the state's really encouraging heat pump adoption, which is different from our gas water heaters and our furnaces. So kind of moving away from those appliances. And another couple other big things to highlight is pre-wiring is not going to become a requirement for gas appliances, and there's going to be higher ventilation rates for any gas stoves. So really highlighting the importance of air quality when it comes to cooking. If it was an electric stove, you wouldn't need as high of a CFM rate for your fume hood. Oh, you switched. Thank you, Lara. This slide here, really the takeaway here, we put this infographic together for the current code cycle. We're in the process of updating it for the next code cycle. And our team ran some numbers and looked at a report put together by E3 to tell the story of what would it cost to build and operate an all-electric a newly built all-electric single-family home in the Bay Area. And in the summary, what you can see is that it's about $11,000 cheaper to build it. And on the operating costs, if you can increase the amount of solar that's on the home beyond what the minimum state requirements are, it actually saves you a little bit of money on your energy bill. Next slide, please. So in terms of what other cities and counties are doing, excuse me, what this side on the, I'm gonna point you to the right side. These are all the different cities that have adopted some level of a REACH code, whether it's building electrification or EV charging. And on the left side, we just have a summary of how that breaks down across the different CCAs. So quite a bit of activity going on since the last code cycle. For this code cycle, what a lot of cities are doing is that if they've adopted an all-electric REACH code, meaning they're requiring all-electric construction, with some exceptions. A lot of cities are looking back at those exceptions and realizing, we don't really need a lot of these. We don't need to exempt. These are just some examples. You don't need to exempt ADUs if they had an ADU exemption. We don't need to exempt cooking because no one actually applied for it. But that's what a lot of cities are doing. Some are even starting to consider existing buildings, which TRC is in the process of working with PCE, SVCE, and EBCE in developing some resources there around cost-effective measures for existing buildings. And we actually have some permit ordinance language already for cities and counties to use. But we can see this movement that some jurisdictions are already considering existing buildings. And really the majority of cities have adopted an EV code, which again goes beyond what the minimum Cal Green requirements are, what the minimum state code requirements are. Next slide. So before we move on to eventually what the REACH code team is proposing in terms of new ordinances for the 2022 code cycle, which again starts in January. And before we dive into what the County of San Mateo currently has, I'm going to go through some EV definitions. And these definitions fall in two categories. One is the speed of the charger, and then the other category is the level of infrastructure. So when it comes to the charging speed, we're talking we use terms like level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 1, that's the slowest form of charging, you get 4 miles per hour, but that just requires a 120 volt. So say you buy a car, you don't need to do any, heavy retrofitting of your home. If you have a level 1 charger, you can just plug it right in. A level 2 does require a 240 volt plug, so that would require some upgrades, but you get more charging out of it. You can imagine with looking at these numbers, an overnight charge might be adequate for you or your community if you're charging overnight. Level 3, those are DC fast chargers. These are ones you see out in Target, and the ones that people usually just plug in for 30 minutes and they're ready to go. On the infrastructure, EV capable means that there is panel capacity and raceways. So there is a path for electrical wiring, but the wiring doesn't have to be there yet. There is a reserved space in the panel, but there isn't a breaker or a circuit installed yet. Those pieces come in at the EV ready stage. So EV ready has a full circuit for either level 1 or level 2 charger to be installed in the future. And then a full EV charging station has all of the equipment available and installed. So, all right, I will hand this back to you, Alero, to give us a history lesson on the last code cycle.
Thank you so much, Myra. So, as Myra just mentioned, I am going to give an overview of what we did for unincorporated San Mateo County in 2019. Firstly, I'm going to give an overview of the adoption process. We did a study session in October of 2019. We also did outreach. I believe that we went to a few community councils, one of them in North Fair Oaks. We did some email, and then we also had a similar event, also called the Builders Roundtable, as we had today. We had both our first and second Board of Supervisor meetings in February of 2020, back to back. So in 2019, when it came to our buildings, we ended up amending Part 6 of Title 24, which is the energy code. And we ended up calling for all electric new construction. And this was for indoor appliances. We did have an allowance for gas for outdoor appliances. However, we did ask for electric pre-wiring for those appliances outdoors. The exceptions that we had in 2019 for buildings were labs, if there was a lack of an electric compliance pathway, restaurant kitchens, and public emergency centers. As far as EV charging, for our 2019 REACH code, we had an amendment to Part 11, which is California Green Building Standards, or Cal Green of Title 24. This EV charging had two components. It had residential and non-residential. Within the residential scope was single and multifamily, and then non-residential focused on offices and other commercial facilities. Overall, when it came to the residential exceptions, there was no commercial power supply, as well as ADUs and junior ADUs. So that was a broad overlapping exception for residential. For single families, we called for if you had two parking spaces, one was to be level 2 EV ready and the other one level 1 EV ready. If you only had one space, we asked for it to be level 2 EV ready. which is the exception that you see down there. For multifamily charging, we asked for 10% of charging spaces to be level 2 EV ready and 40% to be level 1 EV ready. And as you remember, the level 1 EV readiness is just the normal outlets that you generally have at home. For non-residential, the exceptions we had were once again that non-commercial power supply, as well as automated mechanical car parking systems. As far as I understand, those are sort of like the car elevators when you want to stack your cars. So generally speaking, very dense spaces where there aren't a lot of parking spaces, you'll see those sort of car elevators. And so that's one of the exceptions too for non-residential. So for office spaces, we called for 10% to have level 2 EV chargers, 10% of parking to have level 1 EV chargers, and then a remaining 30% to be EV capable. And for other commercial facilities, we asked for 6% to be level 2 chargers and 5% to be level 1 chargers. And essentially, the exception that we have in place is instead of, for example, putting, let's say 6, I think it's EV level 2 chargers, you can switch that out for 1 fast charger. And there's also a separate ratio, maybe it's 5 level 1 chargers to 1 fast charger, in order to sort of accommodate. Now I'm going to hand things back to Myra, and she's going to give an overview of the 2022 Model Reach Code language.
Thanks, Alero. So just to go over some quick definitions, the model here refers to a recommendation. So you might hear model or recommended code used interchangeably. Next slide, please. So for new construction, what we're recommending is that cities and counties adopt an all electric reach code, meaning all the construction needs to won't have any gas appliances. There are some we do have language for some exceptions around infeasibility. So if your design doesn't have an all electric compliance pathway to meet code, we have language for that in case cities want to adopt any exceptions. And we also have to help jurisdictions define new construction. We've put forth this definition: if either 50% of the framing or foundation are replaced over 3 years for purposes other than repair or reinforcement. That's our recommendation, and I think the county is working through this definition and coming up with their own proposal. Next slide, please. So again, we have language on, and all of this can be found on our website, bayareareachcodes.org. But we do have some language to support cities that are considering different types of exceptions. And the one thing is for any exempted appliances, if they are to be gas, we do encourage county to at least require pre-wiring and reserving a physical space for those future electric appliances. Next slide, please. So I had to move our little, let me move this out of the way. Okay, so yeah, so what's showing here is just a comparison between what our different requirements for the last code cycle, or recommended code for the last code cycle, compared with this one. So you'll see that this time around it's a lot more simpler. It's just we encourage all electric construction with as few exceptions as possible and some pre-wiring. All right, and then now we're moving on to the EV charging recommendations. So for single family, it's straightforward, and this is what County of San Mateo had for as for 2019. What you'll see on the left side is what CalGreen requires. So this is what the state requires. And what you'll see on the right side is what we are recommending. So as you can see, we're encouraging cities and counties to go one step beyond what the state requires and actually include, if there's 2 parking spaces, include another EV ready circuit. It doesn't have to be level 2. We at least recommend a level 1. Next slide, please. For multifamily, on the left side, what you'll see is that the state has required more parking spaces have EV charging infrastructure. Now, with some level of full EV charging stations installed, at least 5% of the spaces. What the REACH code team recommends is actually 100% access. So installing infrastructure in 100, at least infrastructure in 100% of dwelling units with parking spaces. And there's a slight distinction there between how we are allocating the EV charging infrastructure as opposed to how the state is allocating it. As you can see on the left, that pie chart represents the percentage of parking spaces in a development. So let's say it's 100 parking spaces. 100% would represent all of those parking spaces. How we at the REACH codes team define or allocate these spaces is by the percent of dwelling units with parking spaces. So if you have 100 parking spaces, but only 50 of them are assigned to dwelling units, then this pie chart represents just those 50. And again, the point here is to just provide access to everyone at some point to EV charging. And there's 2 proposals. One is called the low power option, which includes some level of it includes a mix of level 2 and level 1 charging. 40% level 2 EV charging stations, 60% level 1 EV ready spaces. And on the high power option, our recommendation there is 15% level 2 EV chargers and 85% level 2 EV ready spaces. But these could be low power spaces. So instead of a typical level 2 charger requires 40 amps, these provide 20 amps. Okay, so moving on to non-residential. Again, it's a similar story. These aren't dwelling units, so we're not necessarily as focused on providing 100% access, but we do want to encourage more infrastructure be installed than what the minimum state requirements are. And some of the thinking that went into this is, some of these office spaces, EV charging office spaces are already getting utilized, so we just want to think ahead and install the infrastructure at the new construction stage when it is cheaper, rather than going back and trying to retrofit. So this is just a summary showing what was proposed in 2019 versus 2022. And Hilaire, do you want to take it from here?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much, Myra, for covering that. So as far as where things are at today, today, October 13th, we're having this outreach event. And after this, we're going to have plenty of time for questions or comments. And December 6th is going to be what we're expecting to be the first Board of Supervisors reading, and then December 13th, the second reading, and REACH codes generally will take effect January 1st, alongside all of the California codes updates. This time around, unlike in 2019, we are embedding the updated REACH code within all the other building updates that are taking place. So that is being led by planning, and they will officially be the ones going to the Board of Supervisors for that. And now we have time for questions. Our first question is if we could share the slide deck, and the answer is yes. This is recorded, and the recording as well as the presentation information will be shared out to those who registered as well as published on our YouTube or on our website. I don't know if we've decided which one yet, but make sure it's readily available. I think maybe we can give a few moments for folks to gather their thoughts and answer any questions. And if not, I'm going to pop my email in the chat. And you can always reach out to me with any questions, and I'm happy to point you in the right direction.
Hi, everyone. Alara, there's a question from Jimmy. What are the technology-specific exceptions that will be expiring in 2025 that were mentioned?
So I'll go back. So the exemptions, I don't know if I quite capture your question. Are the exemptions will expire with the REACH code? So we would have to readopt new exemptions for this next cycle. So right now, the exemptions that I think Myra presented with the model code, did I pass it? Are, oh, one more. Public interest and feasibility, just general recommendation to have electric readiness, and technology specific exemptions at 2025. Myra, can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, so it's not specific language for it's not for any specific end uses. It's more of it's going back to what Alara was explaining, that this is going to be this ordinance is going to be in place for the next 3 years, so we'll have to evaluate it come 2025 in December 2025, 3 years from now. It's really, how can I say this? Where I'm looking at the exception language that we have, and we don't have anything specific to 2025, but here we go. It's related to industrial end uses. So, right now we acknowledge that there isn't a pathway for electrifying heavy industry. And so what we're trying to encourage cities and counties to do is look at a mechanism for maybe electrifying those appliances in the future. In addition to that, we also have some language in here on commercial cooking as well. Again, that's an area where it can be hard to find a comparable all electric replacement for a commercial gas cooking appliance, depending on what the type of food the restaurant is cooking. And what our language says, and I'll just read the exact language. So, and this is in our exceptions document on the website. For example, commercial cooking on or before January 1st, 2025. An applicant may request an exception for utilizing fuel gas infrastructure for commercial food heat processing equipment. So that that January 1st, 2025 date is a recommendation for cities and counties to consider how long an applicant could apply for an exception for either commercial cooking or the other one is specifically industrial process heat. And again, it's because we don't, these are harder, this is harder equipment to electrify, but we don't want to propose this indefinite exception if technologies improve and we can revisit this in a few years.
Thank you, Myra. We'll hold on, we'll sit tight for a few more minutes just in case any other questions come through.
And I just want to go back to a comment Alero said at the beginning. The county's not making any recommendations today, and what I'm describing is, or the county isn't, Alero isn't presenting anything the county's putting forth for the 2022 code cycle. What I'm talking about is just our recommendations, and cities can either choose, cities and counties can either choose to adopt those recommendations or not. So, you know, the county may or may not have those ordinances in the 2022 version of the REACH code.
Yes, and to add to that, that's why we're hosting this event, is to be able to ensure that we're creating a space for public input about how we proceed with 2022 building REACH codes.
I think Jimmy had another question. Yeah, our recommendation is that all new construction, including single family, multifamily, commercial, go all electric. Again, we do have language in the exceptions document that cities can use for anything around, you know, commercial kitchens or, you know, emergency centers, hospitals, labs. Each city kind of has their building stock is unique, and so we offer that flexibility, kind of a menu of options. So to answer your question, it's a yes, but you know, yes, but we do have exceptions if they are needed.
And just to add to that, based on what we did in 2019, that's how we moved forward. All new construction for both residential and non-residential. So we have another question saying, to be clear, no changes to current residential buildings. As far as changes in code for new construction, oh, to current residential, are you referring to existing buildings? If you could just type it in the Q&A, that would be helpful, just to make sure. Yeah, so we are not currently considering any reach codes touching on existing buildings. As you saw from the 2022 model reach code language drafted by PCE, EBCE, SVCE, they recommend that there is a 50% trigger as far as remodel trigger, which would trigger this new construction reach code. However, it seems relatively unlikely that that is something that our building and planning will move forward with, especially because we're starting to tread in that existing building territory, and it would require a lot more outreach and conversation for us to get there, as far as I understand. We are considering, I just wanted to add too, though, as far as existing building goes, that is something that we do plan on starting to address by having the appropriate conversations with the stakeholders that would be impacted and involved in the implementation of such an ordinance in 2023. So there will be outreach events to moving forward as it relates to going into existing building. And it's worth noting too that we are hyper aware of equity and how moving into existing building territory could impact and further disproportionately affect burden communities. All right, well, I would like to take the time to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Myra, for your help putting this together. Thank you, Camille, for being our tech wizard of the evening. Thank you all for taking up some time from your families or from whatever you like to do in the evening to be with us here today to talk reach codes. And as a reminder, my email is in the chat if you would like to reach out with any additional questions. I am not all-knowing, but I generally am pretty decent at pointing people in the right direction to make sure that their questions get answered adequately. From now, I would like to allow everyone to enjoy the rest of their evening. So thank you very much.